Rain came sideways across the yard, turning the cattle pens into a slow, sucking mess while she wrestled a broken gate back into place, jaw set like she'd rather fight wood than speak to anyone at all. The men who used to help were gone, left or buried, same difference now. By the time she noticed him, he'd already finished lifting the post she couldn't steady. Didn't ask, just fixed it. She wiped her hands. "You work for me, nothing more." He nodded once, but didn't leave. Just looked at her, quiet, steady, like he recognized something she'd spent years hiding. And for the first time in a long while, the work didn't feel like the hardest thing she was holding. Before we ride deeper into this tale, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another journey through the dust, danger, and legends of the Wild West. Now, back to the trail. Rain didn't come gently that season. It cut across the land in hard, slanted sheets that turned the yard into something closer to a churned riverbank than a place fit for cattle or men. By first light, she was already outside, boots sunk deep in mud that pulled at every step like it meant to keep her there. She moved through the work without pause, checking the weakened posts along the pen, counting the cattle by habit rather than sight, fixing what gave way before it could fully break. There was no one to call for help anymore. Not since the last of them had either drifted off for steadier pay or been lowered into the ground with nothing left to argue over. She kept the books balanced, kept the animals fed, kept the fences standing. That was enough. It had to be. Inside the house, nothing moved unless she did. One plate, one cup, a chair that stayed pushed in unless she needed it. Even the fire burned low, like it understood its place was not to warm, just to function. She didn't linger there long. Work made more sense than quiet. By mid-morning, the south gate gave out. The hinge tore loose under pressure from the cattle pressing in, wood cracking with a sound that carried across the yard. She reached it fast, dragging the post back into place, bracing her shoulder against it while rain soaked through her coat and ran cold down her spine. "Hold," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than the wood. The post shifted anyway. She adjusted her footing, tried again, this time harder, jaw tightening as the mud slipped beneath her boots. The weight was wrong. Needed two hands, two angles. Needed. The pressure eased, just enough to matter. She stilled, breath catching once, then turned her head. A man stood on the other side of the post, steadying it like he'd been there longer than she'd noticed. Hat pulled low against the rain, no rush in his movements, no explanation offered. He didn't look at her right away. Just kept the wood in place while his other hand worked the hinge back into alignment with quiet, practiced motions. Not hurried, not hesitant, like he knew what he was doing and didn't need to prove it. She let go slowly, stepping back without thanking him. Didn't ask where he came from, didn't ask why he was there. Questions had a way of inviting things she didn't have room for. He finished the repair without a word, securing the post tight enough to hold against the strain. Then he stepped back, wiping his hands once against his coat, waiting, not expectant, just still. She studied him then, properly, clothes worn but kept, boots that had seen distance but not neglect. No badge, no mark of a man tied to any one place. The kind that passed through and didn't stay long enough to leave a dent. Good. That gate holds, she said flatly, more statement than praise. He gave a small nod. It will. His voice was quiet, even, like he measured what he said before letting it out. She didn't like that she noticed. Wind shifted, throwing rain harder across the yard. She turned back toward the house, already moving on to the next task. "If you're looking for work," she said over her shoulder, not slowing, "you'll find it here." He didn't answer right away. His boots followed a few steps behind, not closing the distance unless she set the pace. That she noticed too. She stopped near the edge of the porch and faced him fully now, water dripping from the brim of her hat. "You work for me," she said, clear, final. Nothing more. No room for misunderstanding, no space for anything beyond that. He met her eyes then, not bold, not challenging, just steady, understood. He didn't ask about pay, didn't ask about hours, didn't try to make it into more than she offered. That should have made it easier. It didn't. She turned away first, pushing the door open and stepping inside without checking if he followed. The house held the same stillness as before, unchanged by his presence outside. That was how it would stay. Out there he could work, fix what needed fixing, keep to his place. In here nothing changed. It had taken her too long to build a life that didn't depend on anyone. She wasn't about to let a quiet man with steady hands and a habit of appearing where he wasn't asked undo it. And yet, as she set a second plate on the counter without thinking, then paused, she realized something small, something she didn't have a name for. For the first time in a long while, the work outside hadn't been the hardest part of the day. The first thing she noticed was that he did exactly what she told him. The second thing she noticed was that he didn't. It started small. She told him to patch the north fence where the posts had started to lean after the storm, not rebuild it, not improve it, patch it enough to hold through the season. By late afternoon, she rode out to check his work, expecting to find something she could correct. Instead, she found the fence standing straighter than it had in years. Not new, not replaced. Reinforced. He de-braced the weakest posts with scrap timber she'd forgotten she even had, angled just enough to take the strain off the wire. The line held firm, the cattle kept their distance, and nothing about it looked like a man trying to show off. It looked right. She dismounted slowly, boots hitting the dirt with less force than usual, walked the length of it, tested the tension. Then she found him a few yards down, coiling wire. "I told you to patch it," she said. He didn't look up right away, finished what he was doing, set the coil aside. "I did." She frowned slightly, glancing back at the posts. "That's more than a patch. It'll last longer this way." There was no challenge in his voice, no edge, just a simple statement that irritated her more than if he'd argued. "You don't decide that," she said. "I do." He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." No hesitation, no defense. That should have ended it. It didn't. She lingered a moment longer than necessary, eyes moving over the work again, looking for something to fault. Didn't find it. "Next time," she said, turning back toward her horse, "you do it the way I say." "Yes, ma'am." Still no resistance, still no need to prove himself right. She mounted up and rode off, jaw set tight, not because the work was wrong, but because it wasn't. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. She'd leave instructions in the morning, clear, direct, efficient. By evening, the work would be done exactly as asked, except for something small, a shift in how the load was balanced, a better way to store feed so it didn't spoil, tools arranged in a way that saved her a few steps she hadn't realized she was taking, never enough to call him out outright, just enough that she noticed. And every time she did, it left the same quiet question behind. Why? Not why he changed things. Why he didn't push it. Men who thought they knew better usually made sure you knew it too. They de-argue, explain before you asked, stand a little taller when they were right. He didn't. He waited, only spoke when she asked, and when she didn't, he let it go. One morning she found him in the tool shed before sunrise. The lantern was still dim, light barely reaching the far wall, but he was already working. A broken handle she'd set aside 2 days ago, intending to fix it when she found the time, was laid out in pieces on the table. He was shaping a replacement. Careful, precise. She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "I didn't tell you to fix that." He glanced up briefly, then back to his work. "It needed fixing. I had it handled." "I know." "That stopped her, you know," she repeated. He set the tool down then, wiping his hands once before turning to face her fully. "You would have gotten to it," he said. "Just figured I'd save you the time." No pride, no expectation of thanks, just usefulness. She studied him a moment longer than necessary, then pushed off the frame. "Don't assume what I need," she said. "Yes, ma'am." And just like that, he went back to work. It wore on her more than it should have, not because he was doing anything wrong, because he was, and that left her with nothing to push against. No argument to win, no mistake to correct, just quiet. The first real break came over something small. Food. She didn't cook more than she needed to. One plate, one portion, enough to get through the day and move on. That evening she stepped into the kitchen expecting the same routine, quick meal, quiet house, no interruption. Instead she found smoke. Not heavy, not dangerous, just enough to tell her something had gone wrong. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled the pan off the stove before it could burn further. "What are you doing?" she said, sharper than intended. He stood there holding a wooden spoon like it didn't quite belong in his hand. "Trying to cook," he admitted. She stared at the pan. Then at him. "Why?" "Figured I'd help." "You don't help in here." He nodded once, understood. But he didn't move to take it back, didn't try to fix it, just waited. She looked down at the meal again, overdone, uneven, clearly unfamiliar to him. Something about it didn't make sense. "You don't know how to cook," she said. "No." "Then why try?" He paused, just for a moment. "Because you've been eating the same thing every night since I got here." That landed, not hard, but steady. She set the pan down slowly, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You've been watching that close." "No." "A beat, just enough." She should have told him to stop, told him it wasn't his place. Instead, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, then quiet, unexpected. A small sound slipped out, a laugh. It caught her off guard as much as it did him, short, soft, gone almost as soon as it came, but it was there. For a moment the room felt different, lighter. She cleared her throat, turning away. "Next time," she said, picking up the pan again, "you stick to what you know." "Yes, ma'am." But there was something in his voice now, not humor, not quite, something warmer. After that the days shifted, not all at once. Nothing on that ranch ever changed that fast, but piece by piece something eased. He started anticipating problems before they reached her, water buckets filled before she asked, gates checked before they failed, feed measured in a way that stretched further without cutting corners. He didn't take over, didn't step in front. He stayed just behind the work, steady, present, making things easier without making it obvious, and without meaning to. She started letting him. With the weight of daily tasks easing, she found herself looking beyond survival again. The east pasture had been neglected for 2 seasons, too much effort to repair, not enough hands to manage it. Now she walked it, measured the land, checked the soil, made plans. He followed when she asked, stayed back when she didn't. "Fence line needs clearing," she said one afternoon, scanning the overgrowth. "It does." You can handle that. Yes, ma'am. No hesitation, no need to prove anything, just certainty. In town, things shifted too. The first time she walked into the general store after the storms, people looked at her the way they always had, polite, cautious, waiting to see how much of her strength was holding and how much was for show. The second time. It was different. Fence held through that last rain, the storekeeper asked. It did. Good work. Not sympathy, not pity, recognition. She noticed it, didn't show it, but she noticed. On the ride back, she didn't say much. He rode a few steps behind, same as always. You didn't say anything back there, she said finally. About what? The pasture, the fence, any of it. He glanced toward her briefly, then back to the trail. You had it handled. She let that sit. You've had a hand in it, she said, a small one. Still a hand. He didn't answer, didn't take it, didn't deny it either, just let it stay where it was. That was when she realized something else. He never claimed space that wasn't given, not in the work, not in the house, not anywhere, and somehow that made room she hadn't known was missing. It crept in slowly, the shift. At first it was small things. She'd step out onto the porch in the morning and find the yard already moving, him working through tasks before she gave the order. She'd pause just for a second, watching, then continue on like she hadn't. Other times she'd notice when he wasn't there, a delay, a gap, something unfinished that usually wouldn't be, and it would pull at her attention in a way that felt unfamiliar, unwanted. One evening he came back late from the far pasture. The sun had already dipped low, shadows stretching long across the yard. She stood near the gate, arms crossed. You're late. Yes, ma'am. No excuse, no explanation. That irritated her more than anything else. What took so long? Fence line needed more work than expected. She studied him a moment. Mud on his boots, sweat still damp at his collar, work done just longer than planned. You should have said something, she said. I will next time. A pause, there it was again, that quiet certainty. She turned away first. Get it finished tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. That night the house felt different, not quieter, not louder, just aware. She moved through her routine the same way she always did, meal, ledger, check the fire, but something sat just beneath it, unsettling. The next morning she stepped outside earlier than usual. The yard was still, no movement, no sound. She waited, a minute, two, then she heard it, the distant rhythm of work already underway. He'd gone out before dawn, without being told. She exhaled slowly. And for reasons she didn't care to name, that steadiness settled something in her chest. It wasn't loneliness. She didn't believe in that anymore, didn't have time for it, didn't need it. But this was different. This was presence. A few days later, she caught herself doing something she hadn't done in a long time. Listening, not for danger, not for trouble, for him, the sound of boots across the yard, the shift of tools in the shed, the quiet rhythm of someone else moving through the same space. It was subtle, almost nothing, and yet, when it wasn't there, she noticed. That realization hit harder than anything else had, not because it changed the work, but because it changed her. She stood at the edge of the pasture one evening, watching him from a distance as he worked along the fence line, movements steady, deliberate, not trying to impress, not trying to prove anything, just doing what needed to be done. She felt it then, that shift. Not loud, not overwhelming, just a quiet, steady awareness. He wasn't a disruption anymore. He wasn't temporary. He wasn't just a hired hand. He was part of the rhythm now, and that unsettled her more than anything else ever had, because it meant something she wasn't ready to face, something she'd built this entire life to avoid. She turned away before the thought could settle, walked back toward the house, steps measured, controlled, but the feeling followed, quiet, steady, unavoidable. And for the first time in a long while, being alone didn't feel like strength. It felt like something she might lose. The horse didn't give warning. 1 second the yard was steady, the usual rhythm of hooves shifting in place, leather creaking, wind brushing low across the fence line. The next it snapped. A sharp, violent jerk. The mare's head shot high, eyes rolling white as something unseen spooked her from behind. She reared just enough to throw balance off, front hooves striking air, back legs digging hard into the mud. She moved before thinking, always had. Hands went to the reins, pulling down and to the side, boots braced against the slick ground as she tried to turn the animal away from the corral rail before it could slam into it. "Easy," she muttered, voice low, controlled, but the ground gave. Mud shifted beneath her weight, her footing sliding just enough. And the mare lunged sideways. Too fast, too hard. The rail came up sharp at her side, rough wood angled wrong for a clean fall. She knew it the second it happened, knew she wouldn't catch herself in time. Knew. The impact never came. A hand caught her first, firm, immediate, one arm braced across her back, the other steadying her shoulder as the force of her fall was pulled short, redirected instead of absorbed. For a moment everything stilled. The horse settled under the tension of the reins now held in steadier hands. The yard quieted, and she was still upright, but not on her own. His grip was solid, not tight, not restraining, just there, holding her in place long enough for the danger to pass. She became aware of it slowly, the closeness, closer than they had ever been, her shoulder pressed against his chest. His hand still steady at her back, the faint scent of leather and rain and something warmer beneath it, something human, grounded, present. She could feel his breath slow, even, could feel how still he'd gone once she was safe. Like he understood the moment wasn't just about the fall, like he knew not to move first. That unsettled her more than the near impact. She straightened quickly, stepping out of his hold before the awareness could settle any deeper. "I had it," she said, sharper than necessary. The words came fast, clean, controlled, too controlled. He didn't argue, didn't correct her, just released his grip the moment she pulled away, hands falling back to his sides like they'd never been there at all. "I know," he said, and there it was again, that quiet, that steadiness. Not claiming what had happened, not denying it either, just letting it be what it was. She turned away before she had to answer that, focused on the horse instead, adjusting the reins, checking the saddle like the moment hadn't just happened between them, like it hadn't lingered, like it hadn't meant anything. But her hands weren't as steady as before. She noticed, hated that she noticed. "You should have secured the back gate tighter," she said, grasping for something, anything, to bring the moment back into something she could control. "The wind shifted," he replied, a pause. It spooked her. "I know what spooked her," she snapped. Silence followed, not tense, not defensive, just there. She finished checking the tack, then stepped back, putting space between them again. Deliberate. Measured, necessary. "Get the rest of the herd settled," she said without looking at him. "Yes, ma'am." And just like that, he moved. No hesitation, no lingering, the moment closed, except it didn't, not entirely. After that, things changed, not in the work stayed the same, but in everything else. She tightened, instructions became shorter, sharper, fix the west fence. Check the feed. Leave the south pasture alone. No room for conversation, no room for anything that didn't need to be said. She stopped watching him work, stopped noticing the small adjustments he made, stopped allowing herself to expect anything beyond what she gave. If he was early, she didn't acknowledge it. If he was late, she corrected it. If he spoke, she answered only what was necessary. And when he didn't, she let the silence stretch. He didn't push back, didn't question the shift. If he noticed it, he didn't show it. He followed her lead the same way he always had, quietly, steadily, without asking for more. That should have made it easier. It didn't, because the steadiness remained, even as she pulled away, even as she reasserted every boundary she'd built. He didn't step forward to close the distance, but he didn't disappear either, and that made the distance feel deliberate. A few days later, she rode into town. It had been longer than usual since her last visit, longer than she cared to admit. The roads were drier now, the storm having passed, leaving behind that familiar stretch of dust and sun that made everything look the same from a distance. Predictable, manageable, she preferred it that way. The general store was busy when she stepped inside, voices low but steady, the kind of quiet conversation that filled a space without demanding attention. It stilled slightly when she entered, not out of judgment, out of recognition. She nodded once, moving toward the counter. "Afternoon," the storekeeper said. "Afternoon." She set her list down without elaboration. He glanced over it, then back up at her. "You've been keeping things running steady out there," he said. "I have. Looks better than it did last season." A pause, feels, lived in again. That word, it landed wrong, not because it was untrue, because it was. She felt it immediately, that shift in how people saw the ranch now, not as something barely holding together. Not as a place defined by what had been lost, but as something active, alive, and that had a source. She didn't answer right away, just nodded once, keeping her voice even when she spoke. "Work's getting done." "That it is," he said, a small smile in his tone. She didn't return it, didn't stay longer than necessary, collected what she needed and left. The ride back felt longer, quieter. Her mind didn't settle the way it usually did on the trail. That word stayed with her, lived in, not just functional, not just surviving, occupied, shared. And she didn't like how easily that thought connected itself to him. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was already starting to dip. The yard looked the same, nothing out of place, nothing changed. Except she noticed him before he noticed her, working along the fence line, movement steady, focused, like always, like nothing between them had shifted, like he hadn't caught her mid-fall days ago and held her steady in a way that hadn't left her since. She dismounted slowly, tying off her horse without calling out, watched him for a moment, then turned away. That night the house felt tighter, not smaller, just closer. She moved through it quickly, avoiding stillness, avoiding the kind of quiet that let thoughts settle. She didn't cook, didn't sit, just checked what needed checking, then stepped back outside before the walls could close in. The yard was dim now, the last of the light fading behind the hills. He was still out there, finishing something, always finishing something. She walked toward him before she could decide not to. "You're done for the day," she said when she reached him. "Yes, ma'am." He set his tools aside immediately. No delay, no argument, just done. That should have been enough. It was. "You don't need to stay out this late," she added. "I know." Another pause. "I wanted to finish it." There it was again, not obligation, not instruction, choice. That word pressed against something in her chest she didn't want to examine. "You've been doing more than I asked," she said. His gaze lifted slightly, not meeting hers fully, but not avoiding either. Just making sure things hold. "I didn't ask for that." "I know." The answer came the same as always, quiet, uncomplicated, and somehow that made it harder. She exhaled slowly, tension building without a clear place to land. "You don't need to do that," she said. He didn't respond right away. Then, "I'm not doing it because you need it." That stopped her. She looked at him then, properly. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm doing it because it matters," he said, a beat, "not just to you." Silence followed, not empty, full. She felt it in her chest, tight, unfamiliar. "You're here for work," she said, voice firm again, nothing more. "Yes, ma'am." But something in the way he said it didn't match the words. The next morning she made the decision, not out loud, not formally, just settled it in herself. Distance, clear, final, necessary. She gave him less to work with, fewer tasks, shorter days. Kept him to the far ends of the ranch whenever possible. Didn't ride out with him, didn't linger near where he worked, and when she did, she kept it brief. He followed it, every part of it, didn't question, didn't resist, didn't close the distance she created, but he didn't leave either, and that was the part she couldn't control. It came to a head at the end of the week. The sky had cleared fully by then, the land drying out under steady sun, the worst of the storm finally behind them. She found him near the bunkhouse, packing, not much, just enough. Her steps slowed without her meaning them to. "What are you doing?" she asked. He looked up briefly, getting ready to head out. The words were simple, expected, and yet they landed heavier than they should have. "You didn't say anything about leaving," she said. "You didn't ask me to stay." There was no accusation in it, no weight, just truth. She felt it settle between them, unavoidable. "I didn't tell you to leave either," she said. "No, ma'am." Another pause. "I figured it was time." Her jaw tightened slightly. Based on what? He met her eyes then, steady, measured, the distance. That word again, clear, unavoidable. She didn't respond right away, didn't have anything ready that didn't sound like something she didn't want to admit. "I'll finish out the week," he added. "Make sure everything's set before I go." Practical, considerate, like always, and that made it worse. "You don't need to do that," she said. "I know." "But I will." Silence settled, thicker than before. She turned away first. "Do what you want," she said, voice tight. "Yes, ma'am." That night she walked the property, not because there was work to do, because there was. Everything was in place, everything held, and for the first time in a long while. That left her with nothing to fix. The fence lines stood steady under the moonlight, the cattle quiet, the wind light enough to barely move the grass. It should have felt like success. It didn't, it felt Empty, not the quiet she was used to, not the controlled, chosen kind. This was different. This was absence. She moved through the yard slowly, boots softer against the ground than usual. Listened. Nothing. No tools, no movement, no steady presence just beyond her line of sight. Just space. And for the first time, it pressed in. She stopped near the corral, looked at the rail where she'd almost fallen, remembered the way his hands had steadied her, not forceful, not claiming, just there, reliable, unasked. She exhaled slowly, and the truth came with it, not loud, not dramatic, just clear. The distance wasn't his doing, it was hers, every shortened word, every turned shoulder, every boundary drawn sharper than it needed to be. She'd pushed him back, not because he overstepped, because he didn't. Because he stayed where she put him, and somehow that made it harder to keep him there. She stood there longer than she meant to, long enough for the thought to settle, long enough for it to become something she couldn't ignore. The next morning she delayed, small things, practical things. Fence on the east side still needs checking, she said when she found him. It's holding. Check it anyway. Yes, ma'am. Later. The supply run can wait another day. Yes, ma'am. And again. South pasture needs one more pass. It's clear. Do it again. He didn't argue, didn't question, but he understood. She could see it in the way he moved, in the way he didn't rush his packing anymore, didn't finish things early, stayed just long enough. Days stretched that way, full of tasks that didn't need doing, full of words that didn't say what they meant, and beneath it, something building, something unsaid, something neither of them had stepped into yet. He remained the same, quiet, steady, present, but now there was something else in it, not distance, not exactly. Just awareness, like he knew the space between them wasn't as fixed as she wanted it to be, like he was waiting. Not for her to ask him to stay, but for her to stop pretending she didn't want him to. And she stayed caught in that space, between what she'd built and what she was starting to feel, between control and something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time, not yet ready to cross it, but no longer able to ignore it, and for the first time since he'd arrived. The work wasn't enough to hold everything in place. The day carried on like any other. That was the problem. The sun dipped slow and steady behind the far ridge, light stretching long across the yard, turning everything softer than it had any right to be. The fences held. The cattle were quiet. The tools had been put away in their places without needing to be asked. Everything worked. And still, something sat wrong. She stood on the porch longer than she needed to, hands resting on the railing without purpose, eyes tracing the same lines she'd walked 100 times before. This place had been built on certainty, on decisions made once and never questioned again, on the understanding that if she kept everything in order, if she worked hard enough, stayed sharp enough, never let anything slip, then nothing would be taken from her again. It had held, for a long time it had held, until now. Her gaze shifted across the yard and settled on him. He was near the corral, finishing the last of the day's work, not rushing, not dragging it out either, just moving through it with that same steady rhythm that had settled into the place as naturally as wind through open land. He didn't look like a man preparing to leave, but she knew he was. The thought pressed against her chest again, tighter this time. He had said the end of the week. It was the end of the week. She could let it happen, let him go the same way everything else had gone, quietly, without resistance, without asking anything to stay that had never been hers to keep. That was how she had survived. That was how this place had stayed standing. She straightened slightly, jaw tightening. That was how it should remain, but her feet didn't move, didn't turn back toward the house, didn't step away from the yard. Instead, they carried her forward, slow at first, then steady. He heard her before he saw her. Of course he did. He always did. The shift in the dirt under her boots, the slight change in the air that came with another presence moving through it. He turned before she called his name. Not surprised, not questioning, just aware. "Yes, ma'am," he said, setting down the tool in his hand. That word again. Ma'am, clear, respectful, a boundary he had never crossed. She stopped a few steps away from him, closer than she'd allowed herself in days. The space between them felt different now. Not empty, not distant, full. Weighted with everything that had been left unsaid. "I told you to finish the south line this morning," she said. He nodded once. "It's done." "I checked it." "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. She could hear it now, how thin the conversation was, how little it held. It wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough for days. "Then why are you still out here?" she asked. He met her eyes, not challenging, not avoiding, just steady, making sure it holds. That answer again, always the same, and yet. Not because this time she heard what sat beneath it, not the work, the reason. She let out a slow breath, something in her shoulders loosening without permission. "You've been doing that a lot," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "More than I asked." "I know." Silence followed, the kind that waited. Not for instruction, for truth. She felt it press against her chest, steady and insistent, the same way it had been building for days, for longer than she wanted to admit. "You said you're leaving," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am." "When?" "Tomorrow mornings." There it was, clear, final, expected, and still. It landed wrong. She nodded once, like she accepted it, like it didn't matter, like it was just another thing passing through, but her hands tightened slightly at her sides. "You've got the rest of tonight then," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't ask her to change it, didn't wait for anything more, just accepted it, and that was the part that broke something open. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, just one step, enough to close part of the distance. He didn't move, didn't step back, didn't step closer either. He stayed exactly where he was, like he always had, waiting for her to decide what came next, and suddenly. She understood. He had never taken anything from her, not her space, not her control, not her decisions. He had only ever been where she allowed him to be, and now. Now she was the one standing at the edge of something she didn't know how to step into. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I built this place so I wouldn't need anyone." The words hung there, heavier than anything she'd said to him before. He didn't interrupt, didn't soften it, just listened. She swallowed once, eyes holding his. "That was the point," she continued. "After everything, I made sure nothing here depended on anyone but me." Her gaze flickered briefly across the yard, the fences, the house, the land that had become both refuge and barrier. "I kept it that way," she said, a breath, "and it worked." There was no pride in it, no satisfaction, just fact. "And then you showed up." The words came quieter now, not accusation, not quite, just recognition. "You didn't ask for anything," she said. "Didn't take anything, didn't push." He remained still. "You just stayed where I put you." A pause, and somehow that made it harder. Her voice thinned slightly on the last word, not breaking, but close enough that she felt it. She drew in a breath, steadying herself, then said the part she hadn't been able to before. "And now I don't know what to do with you." The yard went quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from absence, but from something finally being said out loud. He didn't answer right away, didn't step forward, didn't reach for her. He stayed exactly where he was, and when he spoke, it was the same way he always had, even, measured. "I didn't come here to take anything from you," he said. She held his gaze. "I know. I know you do." Another small pause. "I came because there was work," he continued, "and I stayed because it mattered." Her breath caught slightly, not just the work. He let that sit for a moment, then, "I'm not asking you to change anything," he said. "Not how you run this place, not how you live." His voice didn't rise, didn't press, it stayed steady, grounded. "I'm not here to fix anything for you." That mattered. She felt it immediately, felt the truth of it settle into the space between them. "I know," she said again, softer now. He nodded once. "Then you know I'll go if that's what you want." The words were simple, clear, and for the first time, they felt like a choice, not something happening to her, something she had control over. He didn't move, didn't close the distance, didn't make it easier. He left it exactly where it needed to be, with her. The weight of that settled in her chest, steady and undeniable. For so long, she had held onto control like it was the only thing that kept her standing. Every decision, every boundary, every line drawn to keep the world from taking more than it already had. And now she stood there, with the same control still in her hands. Nothing had been taken from her, nothing had been forced, nothing had changed except her. She felt it then, clear, certain, not fear, not confusion, choice. Her breath steadied, her shoulders eased, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she didn't step back, she stepped forward, closing the space between them, not quickly, not uncertainly, deliberate, measured, her decision. He didn't move to meet her, didn't reach, didn't assume. He waited, the way he always had, until she stood close enough that there was no space left to pretend distance still existed. She looked at him then, really looked, at the steadiness that had never wavered, at the quiet that had never demanded anything from her, at the man who had stayed exactly where she had placed him and had never once tried to take more. "You didn't take anything," she said. "No. I gave you this place to work." "Yes. And you kept it standing." A small pause. "With you." She nodded once, then, "I'm not giving that up." His gaze didn't shift. "I wouldn't ask you to." "I'm not stepping back either." "I know." The certainty in his voice grounded something in her chest, not challenged, not threatened, understood. She took one final step, closing the last of the distance, and then she reached for him, not tentative, not unsure, her hand finding the front of his shirt, steadying herself not because she needed support, but because she was choosing contact, choosing him. His breath shifted slightly at that. Just enough to feel, but he didn't move, didn't take over the moment, didn't turn it into something else. He let it remain hers, and that was what allowed her to stay, to not pull away, to not retreat back into the safety she had built. She lifted her gaze to his again, and without another word, she closed the distance completely. The kiss wasn't rushed. wasn't uncertain. It wasn't something taken. It was given, steady, grounded, mutual. There was no force behind it, no urgency trying to claim something before it could be lost. Just presence, just agreement. Just two people standing on equal ground, one not giving up control, the other never asking for it. His hand came to her side slowly, not pulling her closer, just resting there, solid, certain, matching the steadiness she had already chosen. The world around them didn't change. The ranch didn't shift. The fences still stood. The land remained hers, everything she had built. Stayed, and yet something new settled into it, not disruption, not loss, addition. She pulled back first, not because she needed distance, because the moment had already said what it needed to. Her hand lingered a second longer before she let it fall. "You stay," she said, not a question, not a request, a decision. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She almost corrected him, almost told him to drop it, but something in the way he said it now. Different, not distance, not formality, just respect. She let it stand. Turned slightly, looking out over the yard as the last light faded completely, everything still in place, everything still hers. And now, not alone. For the first time, that didn't feel like something she was losing. It felt like something she had chosen. Nothing changed the next morning, and that was how she knew everything had. The sun came up the same way it always had, slow over the eastern ridge, pale gold spreading across the pasture before the heat could claim the day. The trough still needed checking. The feed still had to be measured. The south fence still laned in one place she meant to fix before winter came. The ranch had not transformed overnight because of one confession in the yard. It remained what it had always been, land that demanded work before sentiment, structure before comfort, attention before rest. She was grateful for that. Because it meant she could step into the morning the same way she always had, boots on, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back without vanity, and still feel the quiet difference without needing to name it too soon. When she came down from the porch, he was already at the pump, filling 2 water buckets instead of 1, not because he had assumed anything, because now there was no need to pretend he shouldn't. He glanced up when he heard her steps. No smile, no dramatic softening. Just the same steady look he had given her from the beginning, only now it no longer felt like a question she was refusing to answer. "Morning," he said. It was the first time he had greeted her that way. No ma'am, no careful distance wrapped around the word, just morning. It should have felt strange. Instead, it settled into the yard like it belonged there. "Morning," she answered. That was all, no speech, no revisiting the night before, no awkwardness stretched thin across the space between them. He handed her one of the buckets. She took it. Their fingers touched only briefly, but neither pulled away too fast, and neither lingered to make a point of it. Then they went to work. That, more than anything, told her she had chosen well. He did not turn tender into helplessness. He did not treat her confession like permission to step around her authority, soften her edges, or claim a place she had not offered. He moved through the morning exactly as he had moved through every other day on the ranch, quiet, useful, steady. Only now, when he crossed the yard toward the barn, she did not feel the need to remind herself he was temporary, and when she called for him near the feed room, her voice no longer sharpened itself first. By noon, they had worked half the lower field and repaired the bent latch on the calf pen. He brought in the saddle soap without being asked. She measured grain while he checked the roofline over the tack room. Their rhythm had always been good in practice. Now it became something else. Not dependence, not surrender, a pattern, a shared understanding of motion and silence and timing. the kind that did not have to be negotiated aloud. At midday, she stepped into the kitchen and stopped. He had already set 2 plates on the table, nothing special. Bread, beans. Salt pork cut cleaner than he used to manage it. Coffee poured and waiting. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and hot iron and something quieter she had not allowed in there for years. Occupation, not intrusion. She stood in the doorway long enough that he noticed. "If it's wrong," he said, not looking up from the pan he was moving off the stove, "I can fix it." She set the ledger she'd been carrying on the counter. "You're learning," she said. "I ruin less now." That pulled a sound from her before she could stop it. Not a laugh exactly, closer than she would have allowed a month ago. He glanced up then, and there it was, that slight warmth that never pressed too hard, never asked her to perform softness just because it existed. She came to the table and sat. He did the same across from her, not at the head, not in her place, not anywhere that suggested a rearranging of the structure she had built. They ate in quiet, not the old kind of quiet, where every sound in the room reminded her that no one belonged there long enough to make noise. This one held weight differently. A chair creaked. A spoon tapped ceramic. He reached once for the coffee pot and filled her cup before his own, then looked away like the act needed no acknowledgement. She watched the steam rise between them. The house had not become warm all at once. It had not become easy. Grief did not lave because a man stayed. Wounds did not close because one honest moment had opened a door. But the space was no longer arranged around absence. That mattered. The days that followed settled deeper into that truth. He remained on the ranch, and nothing shifted where it should not. She still made the purchases, still reviewed the accounts at night by lamplight, still decided when to sell stock and when to hold, what to repair first, which pasture to rest, which hand from town to hire for short work when branding season came around. The deed stayed in her lockbox. The keys stayed where she kept them. The rhythm of command remained in her hands. And he did not once make her defend it. If anything, his staying made her authority easier to inhabit, not because he propped it up, because he did not challenge it. When deliveries arrived, he unloaded without speaking over her negotiations. When a neighboring rancher tried to direct questions toward him instead of her, he answered simply, "It's her call," and stepped back. When townsfolk began to speak of the improvements on the place, he took no part in claiming them. That refusal to grasp at credit did something inside her she had not expected. It let her unclench, not all at once, not completely, but enough that she could begin to separate control from fear. She had built the ranch into a fortress because life had taught her that open doors invited loss. Every board she repaired, every account she balanced, every decision she made without help had become proof that she could stand alone and keep standing. Now she was learning something harder. Standing alone had never been the only form of strength. Some evenings after supper, they sat on the porch without speaking much. The light would soften over the land, turning the farther hills blue before dark. He would clean a bridle or mend a worn strap while she reviewed numbers or simply watched the line of the fence against the fading sky. He did not fill silence because he feared it. She did not weaponize silence because she feared what might grow in it. They shared it. That was new enough to feel almost fragile. One evening, while the cicadas throbbed in the trees and the last heat of the day gave way to something gentler, he said, "You missed the upper corner on the far ledger page." She looked down, found the figure, and realized he was right. She closed the book halfway and turned toward him. "You've been looking over my shoulder." "Not often. Enough to spot my math." A faint shadow of humor crossed his face. "Your math's fine, your eyes were tired." She held his gaze a second longer than necessary, then reopened the ledger. That sounded almost like concern. "It was." He said it so plainly that it left no room for performance. Her fingers rested on the edge of the page. For years, concern had felt too close to pity. Offers of help had come wrapped in assumptions about what she could not carry, what she should give up, what the ranch would become once a man stepped in and did it better. This wasn't that. This was observation without insult, care without theft. She turned one more page and said, "Then hand me the other pencil." He did nothing dramatic, and yet the moment stayed with her long after. As summer gave way to early autumn, the ranch began to show what steadiness could do when it was shared instead of hoarded. The east pasture was reclaimed and holding feed better than it had in 3 years. The old lean-to by the carving shed was rebuilt into something useful. The barn roof no longer leaked over the grain storage. The stock came through stronger. The books balanced cleaner. Even the house, which had once felt arranged around function alone, began to take on small signs of life she had not planned and did not undo. A second mug set out before dawn. A coat hung beside hers by the door. Fresh-cut wood stacked just inside before the first real cold set in. He whittled sometimes at night, and once she found a smooth little wooden horse on the kitchen windowsill. She picked it up, turned it over in her hand, then set it back down without comment. The next day it was still there. A week later, she found herself dusting around it. People in town noticed, though most were careful in how they spoke of it. The storekeeper watched her order twice the flour she used to and only said, "Looks like the place is treating you fair." The blacksmith nodded toward the improved harness work and remarked, "Good to see the ranch moving strong again." The school teacher, a widow older than both of them, gave her one long look one afternoon outside the mercantile and said, "A home sounds different when it's chosen." She said nothing to that, but she carried the words back with her. Chosen, that was the thing, wasn't it? This had not happened to her. She had not been swept into some softer life by need or rescued out of loneliness she had never admitted. She had chosen, one step at a time, not to send him away. Chosen to leave the second plate on the table. Chosen to let the quiet become shared. Chosen the kiss. Chosen the mornings after. That knowledge steadied her more than romance ever could have if it had come dressed as surrender. When winter approached, he asked one evening, "You want the back room cleared?" She looked up from the mending in her lap. "For what?" "It catches less draft than the bunkhouse." She studied him a moment. He was not asking for permission to move himself into the center of her life. He was asking a practical question as the cold crept in, and yet it was not only practical. She understood that. He understood that she understood. The fire cracked softly between them. "You hate the bunkhouse that much?" she asked. "It has opinions about my spine." She snorted before she could stop herself. Then she set the mending aside. "The back room needs the window sealed," she said, "and the floorboard near the wardrobe lifts if you step wrong." He nodded. "I can fix both." "I know." A quiet settled. Then, because she would not let important things hide entirely behind usefulness anymore, she added, "You can clear it." His expression did not change much. That was his way, but something eased in it. "All right," he said, and that was that. No grand movement, no reshaping of the house overnight. He did the repairs first. She helped choose which blankets could spare the back room and which lamp burned cleanest there. By the time the first frost laid silver over the yard, the room was ready. He slept inside. The house did not shrink, it deepened. Winter drew them inward in the way frontier winters always do. Days shortened. Work narrowed to what could not wait. The world beyond the ranch seemed to pull back under cold sky and wind-hardened ground, leaving home to do what homes are meant to do, hold. They developed small habits then, the kind that only arrive when two people stop measuring every inch of themselves against loss. He split wood after supper. She patched gloves by the stove. He learned how strong she liked coffee before dawn. She learned which old scar along his shoulder tightened in hard weather and left the lineament where he would find it without comment. He did not talk often about the failed cattle venture that had broken something in him long before he crossed her yard in the rain. But once, late at night, he said quietly, "I still count what went wrong before I count what's here." She sat beside the stove, hands folded over a cup gone lukewarm. "So do I," she answered. That was enough. No speech, no fixing, just truth shared where once only silence had lived. By spring, the ranch began to answer them. Grass came in thick over the lower field. Calves dropped healthy. The rebuilt fence lines held. There was talk in town that she had the steadiest operation east of the creek now, and for once she did not feel defensive hearing it. She simply nodded and ordered seed. They were married in late spring, not in some grand way that would have made strangers think the story had changed into something it never was. The preacher came out from town on a clear morning. A few neighbors stood witness. The widow schoolteacher cried quietly and pretended she had dust in her eye. He wore his best clean shirt. She wore a plain dress the color of cream with a jacket against the breeze because the morning still held chill. When the preacher asked if she came of her own will, she answered, "I do," with a steadiness that made even her smile feel like part of the same truth. Nothing in the vows took the ranch from her hands. Nothing in them placed him beneath her either. That mattered. They stood as they had learned to stand together, without contest, without rescue, without either one disappearing to make room for the other. Years would likely remember the ceremony as simple. They would remember it as exact. Seasons passed. The ranch did what living things do when cared for well and consistently. It grew into itself. The herd expanded carefully, not recklessly. The repaired east pasture became one of the strongest grazing sections on the property. They added a new line of fencing along the creek and rebuilt the old smokehouse into something useful again. The porch got widened. The roof got redone. Fruit trees that no one had believed would take root finally did. The place no longer looked like a woman defending herself against collapse. It looked like a future. And in that future, the house changed in quieter ways too. Laughter came more often now, still not loud but real. Boots by the door multiplied. Quilts aired in sun. The wooden horse remained on the windowsill, joined eventually by a carved bird and a little dog with one ear cut wrong. She pretended not to treasure them. He pretended not to notice that she kept dust from settling on any of them. Then came one more change, not sudden, not miraculous. Simply the next honest thing life offered once the two of them had learned how to let joy arrive without apologizing for it. On an autumn morning washed in cold gold light, she stepped out into the yard and stopped. There in the dirt not far from the porch were two sets of tracks she knew by heart, and a third she did not, small, unsteady, close enough to hers that the stride kept breaking toward her side. She looked down. A little girl, bundled against the chill, stood gripping the hem of her skirt with one hand and a carved wooden horse in the other. Dark lashes, serious mouth. Boots so new they still held the stiffness of store leather. Boots small enough that seeing them there sent something warm and aching through her all at once. Behind the child, he emerged from the barn carrying a bundle of feed sacks over one arm. He stopped when he saw where her attention had gone. For a moment, no one spoke. Wind moved lightly through the yard. Cattle shifted beyond the fence. Somewhere a loose hinge clicked once and settled. She looked from the child to the land, the pasture lines, the smoke curling from the chimney, the fence they had rebuilt, the barn roof that no longer leaked, the porch widened enough for 3 chairs instead of 1, the man who had come in the rain and never once tried to take what was hers. Then she looked back at the little boots beside her own. Evidence, not of surrender, of continuation. Of a life she once would have called dangerous because it gave the world more to take. Now she saw it differently. This was not the loss of control she had feared. This was the shape of trust, lived long enough to become legacy. The child tugged her skirt once, impatient in the practical way of children who assume love and do not yet understand what a miracle that assumption can be. She bent, lifted her into her arms, and the girl settled against her as naturally as if she had always belonged there. Maybe she had. He came the rest of the way across the yard then, setting the sacks down by the porch before pausing in front of them. His gaze moved first to the child, then to her. There was a question there still, even after all this time. Not uncertainty, never that. Just the old, quiet respect that had marked him from the first day. She smiled then, not because she had become someone softer than herself, but because she had learned strength did not end where tenderness began. The child held up the carved horse to show him. He nodded solemnly. "That one's still your best rider." The girl considered this, then pressed the toy against her mother's shoulder as if sharing the judgment. She looked at him over the child's head. "At some point," she said, "she's going to demand a real one." "She already has." "That sounds like your fault." "Likely." The answer carried the faintest edge of amusement. She shook her head once. Then she looked out across the ranch again. The land stretched wide and steady under autumn light, not untouched by hardship, but shaped by what had survived it. Every board, every fence line, every field carried the mark of work honestly done. Every part of it remained real, earned, chosen. So did this. She had once built the place, so she would never need anyone. Now she stood in the yard with her child in her arms and her husband at her side, and the truth came to her with more peace than fear. She had not lost herself. She had not lost the ranch. She had not lost control. She had chosen to share what she built with someone who never tried to take it, and because of that, the place was no longer merely standing. It was living. If this story stayed with you, ride with us again. Subscribe and help keep these frontier tales alive for the next file at night. Because out here, every name has a past, every trail has a cost, and every sunset still remembers. Until next time, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed